before I came here, I decided to ask around in the office to check if people understood what I did. So I asked them what behaviour change was. And this is the range of things I heard. Well, doing things differently. Me stopping smoking, that'd be pretty good behaviour change, somebody said. Getting the kids to be ready on time. And then somebody got a bit more scientific. Any change to habitual behaviour. So I decided I better resort to something much more scientific. And Wikipedia told me that it was any transformation or modification of human behaviour. Now, isn't that interesting? We've heard models, models, models. We hear my colleagues, who I call normal people, thinking of all different things to do with the definition of behaviour change. And then there are people like us who are trying to go out there and bring it about. So I've decided to simply define it, just for this minute, as changing repeated or habitual behaviour. So that makes it nice and simple to get started. Now, I think it might be very useful to think that we can actually change people's behaviour in only 3 ways. Let's make it as simple as we can. And I think that you can summarise this as 3 complementary approaches. And I've called them changing behaviour by supply management, by demand management, and by voluntary behaviour change. So 3 different ways. And let me describe what I mean here. The word supply, as most of you probably know, supply management comes from economists who say that if we change the infrastructure, then people's behaviour will change. And you can think of examples, perhaps some of you are involved in doing that, changing behaviour by changing infrastructure. So for example, if you provide more space to dispose waste, then you'll have less of a problem with waste. If you provide more roads, you'll have less congestion, so that will change what you see in your environment. If you have more substations, you'll have less energy problems. If you have more dams, you could have less water problems. So these are ways to change behaviour which are very important, and I call this supply management. Now, supply management works really well while you are able to supply. So if you've got space to build dams, if you've got money to build dams, then that's fine. And of course, we always need behaviour change through supply. It's always going to be the case. Let's just look now in a bit more detail at the second category of ways, and again, I'm pretty sure that many of you will be involved in these areas of bringing about change. And I've said there are 4 ways: regulation, pricing, technology, and some kind of education or awareness. So let's look at, the thing about these is that they're all external to the individuals. So you are sitting here in Melbourne, somebody regulates, it happens to you. Or pricing might occur, increase in energy prices, for example, it happens to you. So I call this top-down behaviour change. Again, extremely important because it tends to have an immediate effect. You think back to water restrictions here in Melbourne, what happened? Water use went down. So regulation and pricing can be very effective, these demand management measures. But the problem can be that when you withdraw the measures, the behaviour goes back to how it was. Those of you who are parents don't need to think much beyond that. You have a restriction on behaviour, it stops, you think the child's now taking responsibility, and it can start again. And then we've got the third type of behaviour change, which I've called voluntary behaviour change, and that I've defined as helping people to help themselves. Now, because this third type is probably less well known than the other 2 that I just described, I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain that a bit more. And then I'm going to give you some examples, as Mark said, of the way in which these types of changes can be brought into practice. And most importantly, I'm going to show how they're all needed to work together. So voluntary behaviour change, I've said, helping people to help themselves. And That is to say, getting people, individuals, to identify things that they actually want to change and work out their own solutions. So I'm going to start by giving a Sydney example of voluntary behaviour change in the area of travel. And what happened was that the New South Wales Department of Transport, named something much more complicated at the time, said that they wanted to get people in 2 suburbs of Sydney to reduce their car use, to reduce emissions. One suburb, for those of you who are interested, was Ermington, nearish Parramatta, low income, not that far from the city. And the other suburb was Woy Woy, up on the central coast. So quite different, many houses, a bit higher income, older population and so on. So they said, please reduce the car use and thereby the CO2 emissions. And this is what happened. We had a conversation, and on the right you can see Helen. And Helen was talking to 2 people in Ermington, 2 mums at the school, and she said, when was the last time you were in a car and wished that you weren't? Then Katrina, the blonde-haired person in the middle, said, well, that's easy, it was this morning. I've got 4 kids in 3 schools. By the time I get them all to school, it's 11. By the time I have to pick up the little one, it's 1. And the problem is I'm trying to do a TAFE course. And that leaves me 2 hours to get this done. And it's particularly important to her because she lived in Ermington and not many people did tertiary education, so it was very important to her, and she only had 2 hours. And Helen said, well, in fact, that's really what our program's about. So I'm going to get one of my colleagues to give you a call. So Gail gave Katrina a phone call, and Gail said the same thing. When was the last time you were in a car and wished you weren't? And she heard the story about 4 kids in 3 schools. And then what Gail said to Katrina was, oh, have you thought of a way of solving that? Katrina said, what? Helen said you were going to help me solve this problem. And so Gail listened carefully, and Katrina said, well, I suppose the kids could walk, but they'd get killed, which was her exact words. And Gail said, well, if we could find a way that they were able to walk safely, then would you let them walk? And she said, well, yeah, if you could, I would. And so she, in fact, said, well, I think we'll probably be able to find a safe way for them to walk, and we'll send you a little map.